you've never seen the musical Hairspray, you might expect a film about cosmetic products and vanity. If you have seen the musical Hairspray, you might associate it with catchy songs and Zac Efron, John Travolta. Despite how the musical might appear on the surface, it actually tackles huge topics like fat phobia, the civil rights movement, and acceptance. However, the reason you might not immediately associate the musical with racial activism is because it sure does not look like it. By that I mean this story centers around a lot of white characters, particularly Tracy, the protagonist. We are introduced to Baltimore in the 60s, following Tracy, a fat outcast with a dream of dancing on The Corny Collins Show, a popular television program that spotlights a group of white teenagers dancing to popular songs. Through Tracy's story, we learn about how segregated Baltimore is.
And once a month we have our Negro Day.
Tracy auditions for the show, gets in, and uses her newfound fame to become a racial activist, advocating for integration on The Corny Collins Show. The problem with this plotline is it situates the black community as needing saving by a teenage white girl. We found ourselves in the White Saviour complex. Now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with white people advocating for civil rights. But what does it mean to center an entire story that, spoiler alert, ends with Tracy basically solving segregation around white characters that seem to think having fame and dancing will solve racism? This video essay will strive to answer the question, does the White Saviour complex in Hairspray position Tracy, a fat outcast, as enduring the same level of prejudice as the segregated black people? In order to answer this question, we need to go back to the roots of this musical. Let me introduce you to John Waters, the writer and director of the original 1988 film Hairspray. Yes, he did play the psychiatrist Dr. Fredrickson in the 1988 film
Negroes. Black boys.
and the Flasher in the 2007 musical. This musical goes back further than you might expect, and if you thought there were problems with the 2007 film, the 88 version is sure to shock you.
Please don't hurt me. Please.
This is a clip from the 88 movie to show you how they depict the black community.
You got me. Yes, ma'am. Can I help you?
Does this over-exaggeration of racism in Baltimore reinforce these stereotypes? Here's a clip of John Waters talking about Baltimore in the 60s.
Even racists and even the racist parents that didn't want the show integrated listened to black music. They listened to soul music. And I thought, well, I don't get it. How can you be prejudiced if you're listening to Otis Redding all day? I don't get it. You know, it's so to me that is a purposeful thing I did put in there. The fact that even on the Buddy Dean show that was not integrated, most of the music was black that was played.
Now, it's clear that Waters didn't create Hairspray with bad intentions. He talks about how he felt like he was kind of Tracy in the story.
So I decided that it was my story in a way, a white kid that went downtown and met African-American friends and picketed and stuff. But having a big woman who not only gets the guy, is the hero, does everything. And
it's clear that from a middle-class white male perspective, the line between being an other or an outcast might have been blurry. Here's a clip to show you what I mean.
A black girl could have gotten on easier than a fat girl. No fat girls ever even applied. There was no movement to get fat girls on the Buddy Dean show. They were trying to integrate the show, but no one was trying to get fat girls on. There was not a movement for large women.
This is an interesting point for John Waters to make, considering he contradicts himself by having a black girl and a fat girl audition in the 1988 version.
Are you aware that Negro Day is the last Thursday of every month?
Yes, I've been on it.
Both of these women are ridiculed for even trying out for the show, but only Tracy gets on, which totally goes against what John Waters is talking about.
Aren't you a little fat for the show?
That's enough, Amber.
I would imagine that many of the home viewers are also pleasantly plump or chunky.
Okay.
The problem with positioning this story that encourages integration around a dance show like American Bandstand or the Buddy Dean show is that despite what it seems, these shows were not interested in integration at all. Here's him again talking about the Buddy Dean show.
I was obsessed by this teen dance show in Baltimore called the Buddy Dean Show. And at the peak of its success, it was on 4 hours a day.
Oh my goodness.
Of teens dancing, and they were regulars on the show, and they were huge stars, but only in Baltimore.
Matthew Delmont wrote a book about American Bandstand and its connection to the civil rights movement. In it, he talks about Dick Clark, the host and producer, and how he centered himself as a champion for the show's promotion of integration, despite it doing the exact opposite. He states, Clark's popular histories of American Bandstand present segregation as a simple moral question of right or wrong, rather than a deeply entrenched system of policies and customs with material consequences. Here's a clip of Dick Clark.
Dancing? Yeah, we had all white dancers, and then the producer and I, Tony Mammarella and I sat down one day, and with no direction, no instructions, no memos, no you gotta do this, said, you know, music is so integrated. Maybe we ought to invite some black kids in to mix it up a little bit.
In this way, we see how a white savior takes responsibility for integration. Waters based the Corny Collins show in Hairspray off of the Buddy Dean show and events that happened at the time regarding integration. Here's a clip so you know what I mean.
And everybody thinks, like in the movie where the black kids snuck on the white day. No, the white kids snuck on Black Day because they weren't expecting that. And then it was integrated and they danced, and then they just canceled the show.
Wow.
A lot of things shifted when Waters' film was adapted into a musical. It was extremely successful, moved to Broadway, and ran for over 6 years. It went on a national tour, and it has been translated into over 8 languages. All to say, it took over so much that in order to capitalize on its success, it was adapted into a film in 2007. This film tried to highlight more of the black culture in Baltimore by showcasing more black songs, dances, and to show how the Corny Collins show was actually appropriating black culture despite segregating them. Knowing that the 2007 film added the music, a moment I really want to focus on is when Tracy participates in a rally for racial justice near the end of the film. In comparison to Waters' film, this version has Tracy willing to put herself on the line to fight for them.
You're gonna pay a heavy price.
I know.
Never dance on TV again.
If I can't dance with Seaweed and Little Inez, then I don't want to dance on TV at all.
Now, we get to Motormouth's song, I Know Where I've Been, a heartfelt and soulful ballad which really grounds these characters in a real time in history.
There's a road we've been traveling.
This song is very powerful, and there's nothing wrong with that, except for the fact that it doesn't necessarily match the rest of the tone of the movie, which is very utopian and campy. Totally going against this song, which has totally brought in an authentic and honest representation of the history of racism, which is something the entire film has been lacking. Yet, right after this point, we go to the end of the film, which presents a happy ending, again, going back to this utopian, campy feel. Some people argue that John Waters created Hairspray in such a colorful, campy, nostalgic style that it actually pulls viewers into this utopian world of Baltimore in the 60s without needing to make reality of this time and place accurate. In an interview, Scott and Mark, who created the music, said that they refrained from calling it a message musical, but found it hard to decide how Motormouth's ballad fit into a play that they didn't want to focus on civil rights. The problem with this is you have 2 white guys writing the music, this other white guy who created the whole show, all coming together to try to make this musical the most digestible to the public. The issue with pushing the whole civil rights movement aside, or keeping it in the show but not drawing too much attention to it, is that that is making a political statement. No statement is a statement. And claiming that this world is so musical and campy that it couldn't possibly be pushing a political agenda is total bullshit. So if Motormouth's song was such a political statement, let's see why. Depending on how a production stages this song, it can reflect very different intentions. In a book called 21st Century Musicals, From Stage to Screen, they critique the way this song is commonly staged.
There's a light in the darkness. Oh, the night is black as my skin.
Which is Maybelle singing the song to Tracy, positioning her as the light in the darkness, aka the White Saviour, aka the white protagonist who fixes racism in one musical. So let's see, who in fact does stage it this way?
There's a light in
As we can see, Hairspray Live staged it like this in 2016.
There's a light in the darkness. There's a light in the darkness.
Where these other two stage versions, one from Australia and one from California, both staged it with Motormouth not looking at Tracy when saying there's a light. That is not to say that doing this song without looking at Tracy isn't making a political statement, because it absolutely is, but I agree, a stronger one. By instead having Motormouth just sing the song for what it is, a strong song about resilience and hope, it gives her and the other black performers so much more agency and power in this film, in which they already have so little. It doesn't become all about Tracy, it becomes about the generations and ancestors and the history of segregation. So if we know this musical is about the civil rights movement happening in Baltimore in the 60s, we know it dives into segregation, American Bandstand, the Buddy Dean Show, we know it's about whitewashing black culture, but it all comes down to one question. Can experiencing racism be compared to experiencing fat phobia? According to John Waters, yes.
Now when you say you can't screw up Hairspray, why do you think that's true?
Because the message speaks to everybody. A fat girl stands for every outsider.
Despite what Waters says, we cannot forget that despite Tracy being a victim of bullying based on her body image, she's still white, and therefore she has so much more privilege to begin with that allows her to be able to go into their part of town and use the platform she was given to protest and make statements. No, she does not fit into the typical box that society puts women in, but she has access to a lot more than the black folks in Baltimore do at this time. The fact that Tracy is this white savior character proves that she has so much more power than the black people because they are positioned in a way where they don't even have enough agency to speak for themselves. Does this musical position Tracy's fatness and otherness as equal to the black people's segregation? I don't know if I'd say that this musical puts these two things on equal prongs, but it definitely tries hard to blur the lines. This is clear because if you read a summary or synopsis of this musical, it hardly ever is clear about the message, and usually says something like, "This bright, energetic story of Tracy Turnblad teaches us all to look past color of one's skin and fight for every human's equal right." Which is perfectly fine, but it does somewhat generalize the message into equality. So if Hairspray doesn't position race and body image on the same plane, what does it do? Ryan Donovan wrote a book called Broadway Bodies, A Critical History of Conformity. He discusses the stereotypes of what bodies on big stages tend to look like. There's a history of staging fat performers in only scary villainous roles or pitiful victims. For Donovan, Hairspray is iconic because it finally has a three-dimensional main character who's confident and the main love interest. Today, Hairspray is still one of the only musicals that promotes fat bodies on stage and screen. This grouping of the ideal Broadway body can include excluding people of color on stage and screen. Therefore, it's understandable how Hairspray tends to group together minorities and call it a play about acceptance and appearance. All in all, what have we discovered? Hairspray positions its viewers in a whitewashed version of Baltimore in the 60s, with the Corny Collins Show, which depicts segregation. The main protagonist is an outcast fat white teenager who, though her own othering, has compassion for the black community and uses her fame to become the savior and integrate the Corny Collins Show. Despite this story not reflecting an accurate picture of Baltimore in the 60s and perpetuating a lot of stereotypes, it does tell a story about people who are often othered and allows a light to shine on these groups at least. Thanks for listening to my video essay on Hairspray the Musical.